The cherry rows on either side of the gravel drive hung heavy with fruit nobody had picked, and that was the first thing wrong with the whole afternoon. Maya Callahan noticed it before she noticed the house. 10 years of walking into rooms where something had already gone sideways had trained her eye to catch the detail everyone else would miss, and an unharvested orchard in the last week of August was not a small detail. Wally never let the cherries hang past their window. He used to say a farmer who lets fruit rot on the branch has already given up on something bigger than fruit. She parked behind Denise's SUV and sat for a second with her hands on the wheel, the way she did before walking into a trauma bay, letting her pulse settle before she needed it to. It was Wally's 78th birthday. She'd traded a shift for it, promised Priya she'd actually eat cake this year instead of texting from the nurse's station, and she wasn't going to let a bad feeling about tree branches ruin the one day she'd carved out for him. Then she saw the porch light was off. It was never off. Wally kept it burning from dusk until he went to bed, a habit left over from nights on the water when a lit porch meant somebody was waiting for you to come home. Maya climbed the steps 2 at a time and knocked, and when no one answered right away, she let herself in, calling his name into a house that smelled like cardboard and cleaning spray instead of pipe tobacco and coffee. Denise came around the corner from the kitchen with a dish towel in her hands and a smile that arrived a half-second too late. Maya, I didn't think you'd make it out this weekend, it's his birthday. Maya looked past her at the living room, where half the shelves had been cleared and taped boxes sat stacked against the wall like they'd been there a while, not like a project in progress. Where is he? Denise's story came out smooth, almost rehearsed, the sentences landing in an order that felt practiced rather than remembered. His memory had been slipping for months. There'd been an incident at the marina nobody wanted to worry Maya with. A specialist had recommended a residential memory care program. One with a very strict no visitors policy for the first few weeks, for his own adjustment. It was better this way. He was somewhere good has a name, Denise, it's not public information yet. Intake paperwork, insurance things. You know how it is. Maya did know how paperwork worked, and she knew that answer wasn't one. She watched her aunt's knuckles go pale around the dish towel, watched her glance toward the hallway and back, and filed it away the same way she'd file a patient's vitals that didn't match the chart. Something here didn't match the chart. I want the facility name tonight, Denise. Not the paperwork. The name, Robert has all of that. He's not back until late. Maya let it go, because pushing a lie in a doorway rarely got you anything but a better rehearsed lie the next time, and because some part of her, the part that had learned patience over 100 bad nights in an ER, told her to look instead of argue. She said she needed the bathroom and instead walked straight to Wally's room at the end of the hall. The bed was made too carefully, the closet stripped down to empty hangers, and the whole space had the particular hollowness of somewhere packed up rather than lived in. She almost turned to leave when she saw the top dresser drawer sitting open an inch, and something metal catching the last of the daylight through the window, his compass. The one his own father had carried, brass gone dark with age, the glass over the face scratched from decades in a coat pocket. Wally touched that thing every single day of his life, checked it out of habit the way other men checked their watch, and there was no version of him packing for anywhere, memory care or otherwise, that didn't include tucking it into his hand before he left the house. She stood there holding it, feeling its weight settle the doubt she'd been trying to talk herself out of since she'd pulled into the drive. Outside, loading her car 20 minutes later, she caught Wally's neighbor, Earl Novak, walking his dog along the fence line, and asked if he'd seen anything the last few weeks. Earl scratched at his jaw and said he probably shouldn't say, but there'd been a moving van out here at an hour nobody in their right mind moves furniture, closer to midnight than evening, and it had left before sunrise without a single light on. Earl couldn't say exactly which night, only that it had stuck with him because of the hour and because whoever was driving hadn't wanted to be noticed. No headlights on the drive. No porch light either, which meant somebody had made a point of keeping the whole thing dark. Maya thanked him, tucked the compass into her jacket pocket where its weight pressed against her ribs the whole drive home, and didn't sleep much that night. She kept running the timeline in her head the way she'd run a chart before handing off a patient. Something happened. Nobody told her. The story she'd been given didn't survive contact with a drawer. In the morning she started with the county's aging services office, the kind of call she'd made 100 times for patients with nobody else to speak for them. She gave Wally's name, his birth date, and asked which memory care program had admitted him in the last month. The woman on the line typed for a while, then told her there was no record of a Walter Callahan in any licensed facility in the county, and none in the 2 counties over either. Maya asked her to check again. The answer came back the same. She drove out past the orchard's back acreage on her way home, the stretch that ran along the county road where nobody usually bothered looking. And that's when she saw it. A realtor's sign, half swallowed by the cherry rose, close enough to the tree line that you'd miss it if you weren't looking for something wrong. Pratt Realty Group, the placard read, with a phone number she didn't recognize and a date stamp in the corner that put it up sometime in July. Wally hadn't said a word to her about selling any part of the land. He never would have. That orchard was the one thing he talked about like it had a pulse. She called Priya from the shoulder of the road, engine still running. Priya picked up on the second ring, already halfway into a sentence about a filing deadline before Maya got a word out. She'd known Priya since nursing school. Back when Priya was still deciding between paralegal work and law school and settled on the first because, in her words, lawyers billed by the hour and she liked getting paid whether or not a case actually went anywhere. She had a flat, no-nonsense way of talking that Maya had leaned on more than once during a bad shift. "I need a favor," Maya said. "And I need you to tell me if I'm losing it." "You're not losing it, you're a nurse who hasn't slept." Talk, Maya laid it out in order, the way she'd give report on a patient, the empty house, the packed boxes, Denise's answer that kept changing shape depending on how hard she pushed, the compass left in a drawer, the van in the night. The realty sign in the orchard. Priya didn't interrupt once, which was its own kind of alarming, because Priya always interrupted. "Okay," Priya said finally. "First thing, nobody quietly places a family member in memory care without a name and a visiting schedule. That's not how any of these places work, even the good ones. You'd have intake paperwork in your hand inside 48 hours if this were real." That's what I thought. Second thing, if Denise had actual guardianship, she'd have no reason to hide the facility from you. Guardians love handing you paperwork. It makes them look responsible. Priya's voice had gone quieter, more careful. "I want to check something. Give me a day." It took her less than that. Priya called back the next evening, and this time there was no lead-in, no small talk, just Maya's name said in a tone she didn't like. "There's a guardianship petition," Priya said. "Filed in probate court. Emergency motion, expedited hearing, the whole thing pushed through fast-tracked, when, 6 weeks ago." Priya let that sit for a second. "Maya, that's 3 weeks before Denise ever said a word to you about any of this. Whatever happened to your grandfather, it didn't start the week you found out. It started a long time before anybody bothered to tell you he was gone." The petition sat between them on Priya's cracked phone screen. 6 weeks old, filed and sealed and never once mentioned to the one person who might have asked questions about it. Maya read the case number twice before she trusted herself to speak. "I need a copy of that filing." "I'm already pulling it," Priya said. "Give me till morning." Morning came, but not with the answer Maya was waiting for. It came instead with a call from her unit manager at the hospital, a woman named Carol Fenn who'd trained Maya as a green nurse 8 years earlier and had never once used that particular tone with her before. "There's a complaint," Carol said. "Filed with the state board. I need you to come in and talk to HR before your shift." Maya sat on the edge of her bed with the phone against her ear, feeling the floor tilt the way it did the first time she'd lost a patient on the table. "A complaint about what?" "Medication diversion. They're saying you had access to a family member's prescriptions and didn't document what happened to them." The word family member landed like a slap, precise and deliberate, because there was only one family member anyone could mean. Denise hadn't accused her of something vague. She'd built the accusation to fit exactly the kind of thing that ends careers quietly, the kind hospitals don't wait around to investigate before protecting themselves. By the time Maya reached the HR office, The letter was already printed and waiting on the table, hospital letterhead. Her name typed into a paragraph about administrative leave pending review. She'd write incident reports for a living. She knew exactly how fast paper could turn into a wall. This is standard while the board looks into it, the HR director told her, not unkindly, sliding the letter across the table like it wasn't the worst thing Maya had read all year. It doesn't mean anything's been decided. It meant everything had already been decided about what Maya was allowed to do for the next several weeks, which was nothing resembling her actual job. Word moved through Old Mission faster than any formal notice could. Maya heard about her own suspension for the second time from a cashier at the grocery store on the Peninsula Road. A woman named Louise who used to save her the good cherries every August and who now suddenly found something urgent to organize behind the register instead of meeting her eyes. 2 aisles over, she caught a pair of women she'd known her whole life dropping their voices the way people do when they want to be overheard just enough. She drove home with her hands tied on the wheel, replaying every version of the last 10 weeks, and landed on the one thing that made the whole shape of it click into place. Denise hadn't filed that complaint out of grief or confusion. She'd filed it with a timeline in mind, the same kind of timeline behind a guardianship petition filed weeks before anyone bothered to explain a single thing to Maya. This wasn't a woman falling apart over a brother she couldn't save. This was a woman clearing a path. 2 nights later, in the kitchen of the house Robert had refinanced twice, Denise stood at the counter running her thumb along the edge of a legal pad, adding and re-adding a column of numbers that never balanced the way she wanted. "She's not going to just let this go," Robert said. He was still in his blazer from a showing that hadn't sold, his tie loosened, a man whose confidence had thinned out along with his commission checks. "You should have waited." Waited for what? For her to start pulling records herself? Denise didn't look up from the pad. She was already asking about facilities. She was already talking to that friend of hers. "I gave her something else to worry about instead of him. The commission votes in 6 weeks, Denise. 6 weeks, and if this thing with Maya blows up before then, it won't." She finally looked at him, and there was nothing soft in it, nothing like a woman mourning a vanished father. "She's a nurse on unpaid leave with no access to hospital systems and no family left who'll take her calls. She has nothing. By the time she figures out where to even start looking again, the vote's already done, and none of it matters." She believed it when she said it. That was the part that would matter later. Maya didn't spend the following days feeling sorry for herself. Though she gave herself one bad night for it, sitting in her dark kitchen with a lukewarm cup of coffee she never drank, running the shape of her own ruined month through her head like a rhythm she couldn't shake. Then she called Priya again, because sitting still had never once solved anything in an ER, and it wasn't going to solve this either. "They took my badge access," Maya said. "I can't pull anything from the hospital side anymore." "Then I'll pull it," Priya said. "I've still got standing on a few of the county filings, and EMS run sheets aren't exactly locked behind a hospital login." It took her 4 days of digging through public incident logs, cross-referencing dates against the timeline they'd already built, before she called Maya back with something in her voice that wasn't just professional anymore. "I think I found him," Priya said. 3 weeks before Denise ever said a word to you. EMS brought an elderly male into your hospital, found down, severe hypothermia. No ID on him. They logged him as unidentified." Maya's grip tightened around the phone. 3 weeks before, same week the guardianship petition got filed, Priya said. "Maya, I think this happened in your own building, and nobody ever put his name on it." Maya didn't wait for morning. She drove straight to the hospital, badge or no badge, and cornered Carol Fenn in the break room before her suspension could stop her from asking one simple question. The unidentified male EMS brought in 3 weeks ago. Hypothermia, found down. "I need to see his intake photo." Carol hesitated, glancing toward the hallway like she was checking who might be watching. Then she pulled up the file anyway, because Carol had known Maya long enough to know she didn't ask for things she didn't need. The photo on the screen was grainy, taken under fluorescent light, a man's face slack with cold and confusion. But Maya would have known that jaw anywhere, that stubborn set to the mouth even half-conscious. She'd watched it argue with weather forecasters on the radio her whole life. "That's my grandfather," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. The chart said he'd been stabilized, treated for exposure, and discharged 11 days later into the care of a listed guardian. No family contacted. No family listed to contact. Just a name on a form, Denise Pratt, and an address 2 counties over that Maya had never heard of in her life. She found the place by early evening, a converted ranch house set back off a gravel road with a hand-lettered sign out front that said Sunrise Adult Care. No license number posted anywhere she could see. The hallway inside smelled like bleach fighting a losing battle against something else. Doors lined both sides, none of them labeled, and a woman at a folding table near the entrance looked up like visitors weren't something that happened often. "I'm here for Walter Callahan," the woman checked a clipboard, frowning. "We don't really do visits without. I'm a registered nurse and I'm his granddaughter, and I am walking down this hallway right now." Maya didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Something in the flatness of it made the woman step back instead of forward. She found him in the 4th room, sitting in a chair by a window that didn't open, thinner than she'd ever seen him. A blanket pooled around his knees that didn't match anything he'd have chosen for himself. For one terrible second he just looked at her the way you'd look at a stranger who'd wandered into the wrong room. Then something shifted behind his eyes. "Maya." His voice cracked on it, like he hadn't used it much lately. "Maya girl." She crossed the room and knelt in front of his chair, taking both his hands in hers the way she'd done for 100 frightened patients and never once meant it the way she meant it now. His fingers were cold, but they closed around hers with real strength, real recognition, and that alone told her more than any chart could. "I'm getting you out of here," she said. "Right now." Today, he nodded, and his eyes went to her jacket pocket like he already knew what he was looking for. She understood without a word, reached in, and pressed the old brass compass into his palm. His thumb found the familiar dent in the casing before his eyes even confirmed it. And something in his shoulders loosened for the first time since she'd walked in. "They said you were sick," she told him gently. "They said you needed care nobody could name. I wasn't sick." He said it plainly, no confusion in it at all, just old anger finally finding somewhere to land. "I was cold. Fell out by the equipment shed, couldn't get back up, couldn't feel my hands. Somebody found me. Ambulance came. Then Denise came." His jaw tightened. "Nobody asked me a single thing after that. Do you remember anything from before?" "Anything they said, anything you heard." He was quiet for a moment, working through fog that hadn't fully cleared. Then his eyes sharpened. "A name. Robert was on the phone, thought I was asleep. Kept saying it like it mattered. Dorkson. Said the vote wouldn't move without him." Maya went still. She didn't recognize the name yet, but she recognized the shape of it, the sound of a man who existed outside the family, someone with power the Pratts needed and couldn't buy on their own. She had him transferred by ambulance that same night, this time with her own signature on the paperwork and her own hospital's name on the intake form, a real bed, a real chart, a real record that couldn't be quietly erased. It wasn't until the next morning, going through the discharge paperwork Sunrise Adult Care had reluctantly handed over, that she found the billing entity behind the facility's license application. Meridian Property Holdings LLC, the same name, she'd learned within the hour from Priya, that had signed the lease on Robert Pratt's failing brokerage office 2 years earlier. Priya's apartment had become something between a war room and a second home for the whiteboard now covering most of one wall. Names, dates, and arrows connected a filed guardianship petition to a shell company to a for sale sign hidden in cherry rose, and every new piece of paper Priya pulled only added another line to the tangle. Meridian Property Holdings, Priya said, tapping the name at the center of the board. Same LLC on Sunrise Adult Care's paperwork, same LLC that leased Robert's brokerage office. "I pulled the state filing this morning. Guess who's listed as managing member? Robert. Priya circled it. "And guess where your grandfather's disability payments and his fishing co-op buyout have been going for the last 8 months. Maya felt something settle low in her stomach, the particular stillness she reached for whenever a trauma bay went quiet in the worst way. Into Meridian, which then turns around and pays down a business loan Robert took out 2 years ago when his brokerage started bleeding money. It's not complicated once you see it laid out. They needed cash, and your grandfather was sitting on more of it than either of them could touch as long as he was competent enough to say no. Priya slid a folder across the table, thick with property records she'd spent 3 days assembling out of public filings and a favor from a friend in the county clerk's office. Inside was a purchase agreement for the orchard's western acreage, drafted, signed by Robert as power of attorney, and sitting in escrow, contingent, in language buried on page 4, on the parcel's rezoning from agricultural to mixed-use development before the end of the year. There's more, Priya said, and her voice had lost its usual dry edge. I got copies of the Planning Commission's meeting minutes going back a year. Commissioner Dorkson met privately with Robert 3 separate times outside of any public session. And here's the part that made my stomach turn. Dorkson's sister-in-law runs a consulting firm that got paid $11,000 by Meridian 4 Zoning Strategy Services 6 weeks ago. Maya stared at the number circled on the page. That's a bribe, that's what it looks like from the outside. Proving intent is harder, but the paper trail is real, and paper trails are what juries believe. Priya sat back. This isn't just Robert and Denise squeezing an old man for cash anymore, Maya. If that rezoning goes through, it's worth millions, and Dorkson's vote is the only thing standing between them and a payday like that. Mia thought about her grandfather sitting in a hospital bed 2 miles away. Safe now, but still carrying the cold of that shed floor in his bones. All of this, the guardianship, the unlicensed home, the silence, had been built to buy a few months of time until a commissioner cast one vote. That same evening, across town, Denise stood in the kitchen with the porch light off out of habit now, staring at her phone like it might rearrange itself into better news if she looked long enough. She's been at the hospital, Robert said, pacing near the window. I heard it from Carol Fenn's husband. Wally's talking again. Talking isn't proof of anything. Denise's voice was flat, but her hand shook slightly, setting the phone down. He heard me on the call. Denise. He heard Dorkson's name. Then it's your word against a confused old man's word, and you're going to keep it that way. She turned to face him fully, and for a moment the mask she wore so well for the rest of the world slipped. You promised me this would be clean. You promised me nobody would get hurt, we'd just move him somewhere safe until the vote passed, and now I've got a niece with a paralegal friend pulling property records and a commissioner who won't return your calls. He'll vote yes. He has to. He's already been paid to vote, Robert, not paid to go to prison for it. If this comes out before the vote, he walks, and we're the only 2 names left standing in the wreckage. Her voice cracked on the last word in a way that had nothing performative in it. For just a second, standing in that kitchen with the marriage-saving money already half spent, she looked less like a woman executing a plan and more like someone watching the walls of her own house close in. Robert reached for her arm and she shook him off, snatching up her phone as it rang. It's the county clerk's office, she said, checking the screen, and answered before Robert could stop her. Her end of the conversation was clipped, professional, the voice she used with vendors and volunteers. But when she hung up, her face had gone pale in a different way. They've scheduled the public comment period, she said. Same week as the vote. 2 weeks from Thursday. Robert exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a month. That's good. That's exactly what we needed. Comment period, then the vote, then it's done and there's nothing left for anybody to dig into. Denise didn't answer him. She was still holding the phone, staring past him at nothing, doing the math on how much time that actually left them. 2 weeks from Thursday. Maya didn't know the exact date yet, not until Priya called her the next morning with the same information pulled from the public notice board outside the township office. There's something else, Priya added, and Maya could hear paper shuffling on her end. I checked the nursing board's calendar. Your disciplinary hearing's been scheduled too, Wednesday same week. Priya let that sit for a second. 2 days before the zoning vote's public comment period opens, Maya looked at the whiteboard through the phone camera Priya had propped up earlier, at the tangle of names and arrows that all led back to one signature, one vote, one man in a commission chair who thought nobody outside a shell company's paperwork would ever connect him to any of it. She had 2 weeks to clear her own name before she could even think about standing in front of that commission and saying a word anyone would believe. The nursing board hearing room smelled like old carpet and coffee left too long on a burner. Nothing like the courtroom drama Maya had half expected walking in. It was a folding table, 5 board members, and a stack of records Priya had spent 2 weeks assembling into something no one could argue with. Maya answered every question the same way she charted a patient, plainly, in order, without embellishment. She walked them through her actual work schedule the week of the alleged diversion, the medication logs from her own hospital showing nothing missing, and the timeline Priya had built connecting Denise's complaint to a guardianship petition filed weeks before anyone claimed Maya had done anything wrong at all. The board chair, a soft-spoken pharmacist named Diane Osei, studied the papers for a long moment before looking up. This complaint appears to have been filed with information the complainant couldn't reasonably have had unless she was monitoring your work schedule in advance, Diane said. That's a pattern we take seriously in the other direction, Ms. Callahan. They cleared her that same afternoon, restored her privileges effective immediately, and closed the file with a note that the circumstances of the original complaint would be forwarded to county investigators. Maya walked out into the parking lot and let herself feel it for exactly one long breath before she checked the date on her phone, 2 days. That was all she had before the zoning hearing. The township hall had never seen a crowd like the one that showed up that Thursday night. Folding chairs lined every open wall, and people who couldn't find a seat stood 3 deep along the back, spilling out into the hallway where a speaker had been set up so the overflow could still hear. Maya recognized half the faces. Louise from the grocery store had come, standing near the door with her arms crossed like she wasn't sure yet which way this would go. Earl Novak sat near the front, his dog's leash looped around one hand like he'd walked straight over from home. Denise and Robert sat near the front too, on the opposite side of the room from where Maya settled in, both of them dressed like people confident they'd already won. The commission worked through the agenda with the flat, unhurried pace of small-town government, and Maya felt every minute of it stretched tight across her chest. Zoning maps went up on a projector screen, an engineer talked through drainage easements, and Commissioner Hal Dorkson sat at the center of the dais nodding along like a man with nothing on his mind but infrastructure. Then the chair opened the floor for public comment. Maya stood before her name was even called, and the room's noise dropped into something close to silence, the kind she recognized from every time she'd walked back into that grocery store since this whole thing started. She carried a folder to the podium. Not a red one, nothing dramatic, just plain manila with copies enough for the board and the county clerk. My name is Maya Callahan. 10 weeks ago my grandfather, Walter Callahan, disappeared from his own home, and I was told he'd gone somewhere I wasn't allowed to know about. She kept her voice level, the same voice she used calling a code, calm because the moment demanded it, not because she felt it. I have hospital records showing he was found in a field with hypothermia 3 weeks before anyone told me anything was wrong. I have a guardianship petition filed before that conversation ever happened. I have financial records showing his pension and his disability payments routed through an LLC that also holds the lease on my uncle's failing brokerage. She laid each document flat on the podium as she spoke, and the clerk began passing copies down the dais, and I have meeting minutes showing 3 private meetings between my uncle, Robert Pratt, and Commissioner Dorkson, along with a payment from that same LLC to a consulting firm run by Commissioner Dorkson's sister-in-law. 6 weeks before tonight's vote, the room didn't gasp the way a crowd does in a movie. It went still in a different way, the stillness of people doing math in real time. Dorkson's face had gone the color of the folder in Maya's hands. Robert half rose from his seat. This is absurd, she's making unfounded accusations against. Sit down, Mr. Pratt. The chair's voice cut through, sharper than anything she'd used all night. She turned to Dorkson. Commissioner, do you have anything you'd like to say regarding these documents? Dorkson didn't answer right away. Then he said, quietly, that he was recusing himself from tonight's vote and any further proceedings related to the parcel, and that he'd be cooperating fully with any inquiry the county wanted to open. He didn't look at Robert once on his way out of the room. Denise sat frozen through all of it, her hands flat on her knees, and when Maya finally glanced her way, there was no fury left in her aunt's face, only the look of someone who had run out of every version of a story that might still work. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just sat there while two sheriff's deputies who'd been standing quietly near the exit made their way down the aisle toward her and Robert. The remaining commissioners called for a vote without Dorkson's seat filled, and it took less than 4 minutes. The rezoning failed, 4 votes to 1, outside in the parking lot, under the same kind of porch light that had gone dark at Wally's house 10 weeks earlier. A county investigator introduced herself to Maya and asked if she had a few minutes to talk about opening a formal inquiry into Denise and Robert Pratt. The county investigator's name was Renata Cruz, and she called Maya 3 weeks later with an update instead of a question for once. Denise and Robert had both been formally charged. Elder abuse, guardianship fraud, financial exploitation for Robert, with an additional count against him tied to the unlicensed care facility. The purchase agreement on the orchard's western acreage collapsed the same week the charges were filed, once the buyer's attorney saw what was attached to the parcel now. Commissioner Dorkson had resigned his seat before the county's ethics board could vote on it themselves. None of it happened with the speed or theater Maya might have wanted 3 months earlier, standing in Wally's stripped-down bedroom holding a compass that wasn't supposed to be there. It happened in filings and hearing dates and case numbers. Which was, Maya had come to understand, what real justice mostly looked like. She drove Wally home from the hospital on a Tuesday in October, the cherry rose finally stripped bare from a harvest crew she'd hired herself, the trees standing thin and quiet against a sky the color of a bruise healing. He'd insisted on walking up the porch steps himself, one hand on the rail, one hand on Maya's arm, and he'd stood there a long moment just looking at the house like he was checking it was really still his. Smells different, he said. Cleaning crew came through last week. No. He shook his head, working the porch light switch with a kind of ceremony, watching it flood the steps in warm yellow. Smells like home again. Maya had moved a duffel bag of her own things into the spare room down the hall the week before, splitting her days between hospital shifts and driving out to the peninsula, because someone needed to be there while his strength came back, and because she found she didn't want to be anywhere else in the evenings. Wally's humor had started returning in pieces, dry and needling, the same as it had always been. He complained about the physical therapist. He complained about the soup. He did not complain, not once, about Maya fussing over his blood pressure log every morning, though he pretended to. She set the compass on his nightstand herself, the brass dulled but the dent still there. Still exactly where his thumb expected it. He touched it every night before he turned off the lamp, the same habit he'd always had, like checking a door was locked. Denise came by once, in early November unannounced, standing at the bottom of the porch steps in a coat too thin for the weather. She didn't ask to come inside. She said she was sorry, in a voice with none of the composure Maya remembered from that church basement kitchen, none of the certainty either. She said she didn't expect to be forgiven and wasn't asking for that. Maya didn't offer it, and she didn't send her away either. They stood there for a minute in the cold, two people who used to be family in some uncomplicated way that neither of them could get back to. And then Denise turned and walked to her car, and Maya watched her go without any particular satisfaction in it. Wally, watching from the window, didn't ask what was said. He just handed Maya a mug of coffee when she came back in, and that was its own kind of answer. By the time Maya returned to her regular rotation at the hospital, her file had been formally cleared, the suspension expunged, her name restored the way names get restored in employment records, quietly, on paper, without anyone throwing her a parade for it. Carol Fenn hugged her in the break room and didn't say much beyond that she was glad to have her back. Her first shift back, a woman came in with chest pain radiating down her arm. Frightened in the particular way people get when their own body turns unfamiliar on them. Maya took her hand to find her pulse, 2 fingers pressed light and steady against the wrist. counting the same way she'd counted 100 times before and 100 times since the night she'd knelt on a cold floor and found her grandfather's hand instead, steady. Even. Getting stronger.